different aspects, our behavior, thinking, emotion, personality, what kind of influences come into play here? Our environment, which when we're in this field, this realm, what do we call our environment often? If we're talking about how psychologists like to look at the world and how it influences people, we've got these two big spheres that we talk about a lot. Yep, that's all part of our environment. And what do we call that? If we're talking about effects that the world has on a person, we have two main spheres. How are we influenced? We're influenced by our genetics and our environment. What are two other words for that? Nature versus nurture, right? That nature versus nurture debate is going to be something that comes up all the time, especially when we're talking about development, right? Why do we grow at the rate that we grow? Is it because of our genetic sequencing, or is it because of our nutrition and chemicals in the atmosphere and things like that, right? So we're going to be constantly talking about this nature versus nurture, not only in physical development, but in all realms of development. Where do we think that this idea comes from? Anybody remember talking about sort of old maybe philosophical roots we know to psychology, and psychology as a science? Aristotle and Plato had certainly these ideas, right? When we talk about psychology as a science, we talk about a lot of the beginnings in early philosophy and just in science in general and how that came about. And some of the significant philosophers that we can speak about in ancient Greece in 500, 600 BC would be people like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, who had pretty big influences on philosophy and therefore science as a whole. And they had some differing ideas on this nature versus nurture debate and how we might look at that. Socrates, for example, right? Socrates, we remember, thought that everybody was born with what he called a tabula rasa. No, thank you. Aristotle has the tabula rasa, and then Plato has that innate knowledge. Okay, so innate knowledge, what does that mean? What is innate?
That means
you were born with it, right? Just like birds are born knowing to make their nests and how to try to fly and things like that, right? Innate knowledge means you were born with it. Whereas Aristotle thinks we've got this, what he calls a tabula rasa, which just means blank slate, which means what?
That we are born knowing nothing, we don't have to learn it.
Okay, so if we're speaking about nature or nurture, which one of these guys is going to say it's nature, that it comes from within? Plato, right? Because he says it's all there, it's all built in. And then Aristotle says what?
Nurture.
It's all the environment, right? We are like unused Play-Doh. We are totally molded by everything that influences us, surrounds us, touches us, whatever, throughout our lifetime, throughout our experience. Okay, so some of these roots in this debate that continues to this day, right, are coming from a fairly philosophical background. And then if we move forward historically, thinking about, so when we're looking at development, we are looking at literally how we develop and change in a species development over a lifetime. On a sort of a broader scale from that, what scientist is interested in how a species changes over lifespans? Darwin, right? So there's a lot of evolutionary theory as well when we're talking about development and human development. So Charles Darwin was actually one of the first scientists to ever study human development. And he did so because he had a lot of kids. So as a scientist and as someone who's interested in changes in species and things like that, it sort of begs to follow, right, that he's going to be interested in how his own children are developing. And, you know, why did little Mary start walking at 12 months where, you know, John didn't start walking till 14, but Adam was talking at this age and things like that, right? So he's got all these kids and they're all developing these little, all going through normal periods of development, which we'll talk about. And he's curious as to why they're different, right? Why are they not the same, and why do some of them vary, and what influences did that have? So in addition to his own curiosity, what might evidence of some sort of scientific process of development, what will that do for his own theories of evolution? If he can prove that the human species goes through measurable scientific changes and norms, what does that do for his theories about the animal species? Yeah, it supports it, right? Everything that he can do to support his theories can be good, because remember, Darwin is sort of the first of his kind with some of his thinking, right? So he needs sort of all the support that he can get. What are some of the major tenets of Darwin's theories of evolution? Joshua, are you familiar with Darwin at all?
We didn't go over it much in our last class.
Okay. Anybody know, like, what about you, Dana? Do you know anything much about evolution or what Darwin said?
I don't really quite remember. I just know he wrote a book and then he was just the father of evolution.
Sure. Yep. What did Darwin believe? George, are you familiar at all? Okay. Survival of the fittest. That was one of the big things, right? And what does that mean?
Animals will adapt to certain environments to survive.
Right. Okay. So animals will need to adapt. Animals, humans, species, right? Plants need to adapt to their environment in order to be able to survive. And survival of the fittest says that the most sort of adapted version of the species is going to be the one to survive. When we talk about survival of a species, what does a species do in order to survive? Reproduce, right? They have to procreate, right? So organisms that change over time in a way that's beneficial, adaptable to their environment, are going to be more likely to reproduce successfully, and thus have their species continue on, okay? So that's sort of the very basic theory of evolution, okay? So what traits do we see in general? What are some survival traits or traits of a species, a human species? Or an animal species?
Sickle cell anemia.
Okay. How so?
Humans develop it to combat malaria.
Okay. So we need it in certain areas of the world, in certain climates, right? To combat a environmental hazard or problem. So those people who can develop it do what? Survive. Have a better chance of surviving malaria. So although sickle cell anemia itself can also be a disease, it outweighs the risk, right, or the death toll of an environmental disease. What else? What else is a trait maybe that's developed? Change of
Color.
skin color? Okay. Why do we all here have different skin colors?
Based on
origin of where we live.
Origin of where we live, okay.
So, like, in Africa, you're probably going to have people who are darker because there's a lot more Sahara desert, so it's like sun.
The sun,
Yeah.
right? What's the pigment in our skin?
melanin.
Melanin, right? So in areas that are bright, sunny,
Closer to the equator.
closer to the equator, right? people have more exposure to the sun. So they have a need for more protection for their skin. They need, melanin protects your skin from the sun, right? Whereas people who are further from the equator need less, right? So that's why, what's a very, like a Nordic country, like Sweden or Norway, right? People of Swedish or Norwegian descent, for example, may find that they have a much lighter, much paler skin tone than people of, what's a very equatorial country? Cuba, Brazil, right? Are they like, than people who are much closer to the equator. So that's a trait that's developed over hundreds and thousands of years, right? Because what would happen if you had very, very fair skin and you lived in a very equatorial country? More prone to get skin cancer. And other, I mean, burns and blisters, which could then turn into infections and, you know, all sorts of other problems that could kill you immediately, right? All right, let's think of one more. It can be human or animal. What's something else that, what do we know? Not like, what's that? Oh, that's a good one, because that's, they only grow here. Do you guys know that? No? Do you know what a Venus, everybody knows what a Venus flytrap is, right? They only grow in the wild in this particular area of North Carolina. Anywhere in the whole world. That's why when people, there was like a big story last year, people stole little seedlings from like Holly Shelter, they went and dug them up. It was a huge deal because it's, I mean, to have any plant in the world that only grows specific to here is sort of a big deal. Okay, so how did they adapt and develop? That's a good example because it's very local. What do they do?
They were too short to get sunlight, so they had to find the nutrition somewhere else.
And where did they find it?
Flies.
In flies, right? So they adapted this ability to catch and digest insects, flies. You'll notice that in, you know, thinking about non-human species, right? Plants and shrubs and other trees that were also too short to get sunlight have developed in different ways and are able to process nutrition in different ways and things like that. Fish developing gills, being able to breathe underwater, right? I mean, all these things that we've learned about in biology and in life in general are evolutionary adaptations, right? Now, besides those that allow us to adapt very much physically as is needed, in today's age, you know, when we were cavemen, we needed to be able to hunt, right? So we needed to be strong or good trackers or good gatherers, you know, be able to find the right foods, nuts and berries and things, and pick out the good ones from the bad ones and things like that. What kind of traits does the modern Homo sapien need to survive? What's different?
We have cars instead of horses.
Right.
I prefer to use them.
Some people.
Yeah. Grocery stores.
We have grocery stores. So if I want to be a successful provider for my family, do I need to be the fastest runner that can like take down a woolly mammoth, right? No, I can feed my family by doing what?
Go to the grocery store.
And what do I need to go to the grocery store?
Money.
Money, right? I need to make money in modern society for many people. Now there are certainly native societies all throughout the world where this is still not an issue, right? In our Western modern culture, for the most part, if you want to be able to feed and clothe and house yourself, you need to have some sort of income. Okay, so what traits are now valuable? What makes us survival of the fittest in modern times, in the 21st century? Intelligence, certainly. Sorry?
Same thing.
Okay. What else? I mean, because certainly, well, I don't know if cavemen were considered intelligent, but 3 or 4 800 years ago, we certainly had intelligence. Socrates was intelligent, right? Although they had financial systems already in place at that time too. So what do we need to do with our intelligence?
We have technology, we have medicine that allows us to live longer.
Okay. So we have to put it to some sort of work, right? What kind of people, when you think of someone who's very successful, who do you think of? What comes to mind?
Somebody very cutthroat, very aggressive.
Cutthroat and aggressive. Would other people agree with that? Aggressive, right? Like, who do you think of? You think of a very successful attorney or doctor, businessman, right? Somebody like that. If you want to sort of, or at least as we're told, if you want to sort of get to the top of your field, what do you need to do? Be the best, sort of maybe climb over a couple people on your way up, right? So at least aggression, assertiveness, these are traits that would be valued, right? What else?
Like have goals, have a drive for success.
Okay, so people that are a little more maybe internally motivated, with a little bit more of that drive, which sometimes I think of going sort of hand in hand with assertiveness and things like that, right? So those are the kinds of traits that are going to survive. If you go, I don't know, if you're single and you're looking to meet somebody, yep, George?
I was going to say that most people who are successful can't adapt to environments.
Sure, right, so having the ability to adapt in and of itself is a trait that makes you adapt better. That's a good point, right? To be adaptable and flexible and sort of thrive in different environments. That's an excellent point. I lost my train of thought too there, though. I don't know where I was going. Okay. Anybody remember what I was going to say?
Single person.
Okay, so other traits, right? Thank you. If you go and you're looking to say meet somebody or something like that, what kind of traits are we drawn to? Because right, survival of the fittest is still going to be about procreation, right? So what kind of people that are successful are often attractive to other people. What other traits might we be looking for?
Confidence.
Confidence, certainly. Physical appearance, right? Even if, and that's something where things have changed, right? Maybe historically, women might not be drawn to a man of smaller, weaker stature. A long time ago, why might that be? He may appear to not be able to provide for, protect your offspring, right? How has that changed now for people when we talk about financial success and money and things like that? So that's an example of a trait where, although physical attractiveness certainly comes into play when we're talking about choosing a partner, the ability to physically protect offspring is maybe less significant for some people, right? Although one could argue that based on a sort of a nature perspective, it's in our DNA, so to speak, to still search out what kind of person. So, and what would we still be looking for? Like on a really like a base level? No. Attraction, and you want somebody that's going to be able to have kids and protect kids, right? So people talk about like childbearing hips, right? Or that women look more attractive when they look healthy and symmetrical, and all these ideas that basically we're drawn to people on some genetic level that we think will be good genetic matches for ourselves. What do you guys think about that idea? The idea that on some level, and I'm not saying that you go up to somebody in a bar and think, be a good father, right, for my unborn child. But I am saying that somewhere in your DNA, your body is maybe saying that this person could be a person that you could procreate with and extend the life of your species. So somehow, on some level, we're still sort of looking for that. Okay, so that's the idea of like evolution, coming up to this idea as far as what we're looking for and what purpose it serves. So moving past Darwin, another significant researcher in the area of human development is a gentleman called G. Stanley Hall. Now, Mr. Hall was around in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So, he's sort of a peer of Darwin's, right? And he is interested in taking some of these child development studies to the next level and really focusing in on them. So he does the first really scientific study of child development. And what he's interested in is developing what we call norms. We're going to talk about norms and milestones, okay, and reaching these things quite a bit throughout the semester. Does anybody here have kids? Younger brothers and sisters, nieces, nephews? Okay, so some experience with children, right? Have you guys heard people talk about them reaching their milestones? They walked at a certain time or crawled at a certain time, or maybe somebody was concerned that they weren't talking yet, or something like that, right? This is something that's talked about quite a bit with babies and children. So this is what Hall is interested in sort of figuring out, like when is it exactly that children are supposed to reach these certain milestones or certain norms. So when we talk about a norm, it's really just the average age at which each milestone is reached. So what's an easy early milestone for a baby? What's one of the first significant things that babies do?
Lift their head.
They lift their head. Yep. What else?
They crawl.
They crawl, right? These are all significant milestones that we're going to look out for, right? Every parent wants to be there when they take their first steps, certainly say their first word. But there's quite a bit that happens, even leading up to that point too. All right, so we're just about done for today. On Monday, we'll talk a little bit more about these norms and milestones. Yep, Danielle? The homework. Okay, thank you. So you have, hopefully, a sheet of homework there. And what it's asking you to do is talk about yourself a little bit in terms of development, right? We talked about doing a developmental profile as our sort of end of semester project. This homework, I just want you to start to get the ball rolling and get yourself thinking about that as a thing. So you're going to talk about yourself up to this point in your life. You don't need to project forward. A little bit about your background, your experiences, what you think might have influenced your story of who you are. Now, this is a homework. This is not a novel, right? We're not writing our biography. So a page or two is fine, typed or handwritten. You can email it to me, and let's say Wednesday, okay, for this homework. So that'll be January 11th for homework number 1. Okay, any questions on anything? Okay. My email should be on the syllabus. For those of you that haven't had me before, I forgot to mention there are 2 Suzanne Smiths. We both have the same spelling, we have the same middle initial, we're in the same department. She teaches history, I teach psychology. Pay attention to my email address, otherwise you'll probably get her. Okay, so mine is smith566. Take note.